Well, hey there, you're on the internet. Please ignore the bandages and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is by, knocked the camera, K.W.Z, a Polish brand, and the entire line of inks was provided by the wonderful, mysterious Benefactor, for which I myself, and I'm sure many viewers, are incredibly grateful. This was actually one of the earlier inks that I tested from the brand. It's just been sitting completed in my file for a while. And actually, I filled these pens with the ink, I think like the day before my computer died. So if you remember those videos from a while ago, I was trying to like test this ink while my computer was dying. And then because of computer problems, trying to fix it, they actually ended up staying in the pen for a couple of days, I think maybe 2 or 3. So yeah, maybe just keep that in mind throughout the test. Ooh, my camera's doing that thing where it's having trouble with light blues and greens. Yeah, so I will attempt to correct this in post. If not, note here. But yeah, so speaking of pens that I used, this is a JinHao X450, and I love my X450s because they tend to be pretty broad and pretty wet, and this one generally is. And this is a Pilot Metropolitan with a Japanese fine nib, and I am still getting used to this, and this was probably, this might even be the first ink that I put in this pen, quite possibly, and I'm still learning how to use it because it is so fine, it's like trying to write with a corner of a razor blade. So, yeah. But, yeah, so those are the pens. Let's check out some comparisons. So here's K.W.Z's Pine Green, and actually the camera's turning it a bit more on the yellow side, so I'll correct that. And I'm going to butcher this. This is Ackerman number 27. Oh god. Bezuidenwoodgrun. Oh god. If you speak Dutch, please can you spell it out phonetically down below, because this is a very wonderful basic shade of green, and yeah, I'll probably have to say the name again, especially when I test it, so please help me. But yeah, so here's another one. This is Private Reserve Sherwood Green. As you can see, it's a little darker, but it does have that hint of blue that this one has, or will when I do the color correct. Here's another one. This is Lamy Green. Again, quite similar. Here I'd say this one maybe has a little bit more blue, but what is it, hue or value-wise, very similar. And here's Diamine's Ultra Green, which is maybe a little lighter and just a teeny bit more yellow, but yeah. So there you go, there's comparisons. Alright, bear with me as I zoom in, because it is never graceful. Oh, camera, please calm down. Oh, that's a bit better. Okay. Yeah, so the one on the right with the little D, that is the one that I let dry. But as you can tell, there's not a whole lot of difference. You can tell where the initial drop was put, but then there's essentially a lot of blank space going up. And then you see a bit of this bright green, and then there's this like big sort of shock of blue up at the top. And the one that dried is fairly similar. I'd say maybe the dot is a bit darker and almost takes on a slight gray tint, but yeah, largely the same. So there you go. Sorry, I'm trying to do this using my left hand as little as possible, which I thought would be easier, but it's not. So yeah, here's the chemical tests. Now, water, for the most part, got it moving fairly well, but not all of it. 1/3 bleach, I think, did something very interesting, because it did not completely break up the ink. Just the areas where it was extremely thin, as you can probably tell where that smear would have continued. But where there was more ink, it turned more blue, which I thought was fascinating. It's actually a very interesting shade of blue. Ammonia pen flesh got it moving, but since it's ammonia, it started to react with the paper, and I sopped it up quickly. And this is probably one of the most noticeable effects I've seen hydrogen peroxide have on an ink, which I thought was a little curious, because that was interesting. Alright, paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Yeah, it's green. I mean, it's a very nice shade of green. It has these little hints of blue. I quite like it. Now, the Japanese fine took 14 seconds to dry, and the Fairly Broad and Wet JinHao took 23. But I think you can see just how like wet this ink is, and like even that Japanese fine, that's a pretty big smear. But yeah, as you can see, there is some nice shading. It's not in your face, but it is there. It's quite nice. And I doubt this will show up on camera, but there's sort of a dark outline around some parts with that X450. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Very good in that regard. Water test is kind of a mess. I'd say like 90% of it is gone. Only the barest little bit remains. It dyed the page. And of course that Japanese fine is pretty much utterly gone, the X450. A little bit is still there, but... Now, next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. It's probably my favorite to write on, especially recently. I've just really come to appreciate it. Now this Japanese fine took 13 seconds to dry. The Broad and Wet JinHao took 25. And again, you might see this sort of dark halo outline thing going on in the wettest parts. It also gets shiny. It's like a black-red shine sort of thing going on. I don't know what's happening. It appears in some areas, especially where it's laid on really thick, or where the nibs had a little while to dry, like you see it here. But again, that's the X450. But the X450 is putting down much more ink just by virtue of it being a broader nib. But yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. I say there's shine, so I don't know if that's sheen. Technically, something weird. But yeah, all good in that regard. Again, water test, it's like 90% gone. It really dyed the page. That Japanese fine is just utterly gone. The X450, something remains, but actually it's very light. It's not easy to read. Next up is Rhodia, which is an 80 gram per square meter paper. Yeah, here we don't get any more of that shine, but we do get a little bit of that dark outline around the wettest parts, and you can actually really see it in the writing. Especially like wizards and jump in some areas. I think that's rather nice. Now that Japanese fine took 13 seconds to dry. The Fairly Broad and Wet JinHao took 21. And I'd say that this ink was flowing at like maybe a 6 wetness, maybe a 6.5. It was noticeably wet, but not like crazy out of control wet. Yeah, I was enjoying it. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, and there's not really any sheen. Now, this did come from the edge of a giant block of paper, and so there was some essentially environmental effects on the paper, just oxygen leakage, for lack of a better term. Yeah, so there's like this tiny bit of feathering here, but ignore it because it's just the paper aging. Anyways, yeah, water test, more of the same. Mostly gone. That Japanese fine is essentially just obliterated. The Broad and Wet JinHao, there's a little something. It dyed the page. That would not be the easiest thing in the world to recover. Next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo, and it kind of did all of those, if this is considered sheen, because it almost looks like, have you ever seen when oil, like a little bit of oil gets into, like engine oil, gets into a puddle, and it has that sort of weird shiny pearlescence that's like kind of black, kind of red. That's what that reminds me of, which I know is probably not the most flattering way to describe it, but I don't know, that's especially on here. But yeah, and this is a cream colored paper, and I don't know, it seems like it's just slightly affecting the color quality, but I actually kind of like it, so yeah, this definitely increased the, I don't know, noticeability of that dark outline effect, that dark halo around the wettest parts, like especially the E and gets, H and here, you know, where it almost looks like somebody went around it with a very fine black tip pen or something. I like that effect personally. Now that Japanese fine took 17 seconds to dry. The broad and wet JinHao took 27. Of course, because it's Tomoe River, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. There is some echo with that X450, I think, and I mean maybe the scrubby, but I was laying it on to see if I could get more of that shine. But yeah, I mean, the X450 can lay it on pretty thick, and since we get this sort of like, you know, almost like black shininess, it can get pretty dark, so I feel like that's just, you know, a combination of the things. But yeah, this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, and it really did. That Japanese fine is essentially just gone. The X450, actually the camera is darkening that up just a bit, but yeah, you can see the barest hint of something, and it almost turned the page blue, like soft, like robin's egg blue, but yeah. Now, for the next 3 tests, I only use that Japanese fine, except to write the name. And this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. Sorry. Yeah, we get some spread. Yeah, so if you see the line width here versus here, yeah, it definitely got a bit broader. But could be worse. But there is a good deal of feathering and sort of a woolly texture, which is unpleasant. There's no shading, but took 1.5 seconds to dry. It could be a lot worse. A lot of times absorbent papers seem to almost like, oh god, my dogs are angry, suck the vibrancy out of an ink. This is not the case. It's still very, I don't know, like bright and jolly. It's springy. But yeah, we do have a couple of spots where we can start to see something on the other side. However, it could be a heck of a lot worse. We've seen much worse. Honestly, I think the fact that it's a Japanese fine that's making all the difference. But yeah, this water test is really something else. Now, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out, and that's kind of what happened here. There are some components of the green that just don't want to let go, but they also sort of feathered and exploded and sort of just like seeped in and got broader. And then what I think is interesting is here at the top, you can see that blue separating almost like identical to what's happening here. But yeah, it would not be the easiest thing in the world to recover. Next up is Mead Notebook Paper. This is the kind you'd find in like a spiral notebook rather than like a lab notebook. The lab notebook, the paper in that tends to have almost a newsprinty kind of quality. This stuff, it tends to feather a lot, at least mine did, and that's something that was continuing here. Like if we see this in paper, we've got some feathers, and it's just something that this paper in particular has been leaning towards. It's something that it's, you know, susceptible to. So I'm not sure that it can necessarily be blamed on the ink. This is something that the paper just does. However, there are a lot of spots where we don't get feathering, we just kind of have a woolliness. Now on here, we don't get as much spread. There is maybe a little, but not as much. It took 2 seconds to dry. Once again, even though it's an absorbent paper, it didn't sort of draw the liveliness out of the color of the ink. It's still a very like bright color. It's still very jovial. Again, this is something this paper does. A lot of times when you add water, it will just freak out. So here it sort of just like seeped in, you know, and it's sort of feathered. But it's there, and it's still fairly dark, and I don't know, maybe if your life depended on it, you could probably draw that out. Now, next up is Moleskine, which I hate because it's terrible. Yeah, we get feathering like you wouldn't believe, except if you know Moleskine, and then you're like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it's hideous. I mean, crazy, crazy feathers. Like huge, like look at the Z. Like just crazy huge feathers. It's ugly. And for some reason it took 10 seconds to dry, even though obviously this is absorbent paper, because you can see where it sucked in the ink, and you can actually see the pulp, the texture of the pulp that they mashed into paper. It's just hideous. And also here the color did dull. Like it almost just starts to look hazy, like faded or something. It's like an old photograph or something. It's very unattractive. And we have spots of show through all over, but they're just little spots, so I guess that could have been a lot worse, but I really think it's the fact that it's a Japanese fine that really saved the day in that regard. And then this water test makes, like, no sense. It didn't dye the page like it did everywhere else. It did get lighter, and then it seemed to, like, quadruple down on feathering, and I don't know. I don't know how easy that would be to recover, because I can barely describe that. But yeah, so there you go. There is K.W.Z Pine Green. It's a nice jovial green with some lovely blue undertones, mildly wet. Yeah, it does this interesting like black shine thing on premium papers. Yeah, it's pretty lovely. So there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.